Awesome. You can all grab your seats. Oh, it's good to be in church today. It's been amazing this morning. Well, this morning it is my privilege that I get to share the word this morning. And I want to speak a message called Fight or Flight. If you're a psychologist in the room, you'll know where this may end up. If you're not, you'll find out. But I want to just start by saying, or asking even, if you've ever, like me, ever found yourself in a moment in your life where you've asked yourself the question, what am I meant to be doing? What is my purpose in life? What am I called to be doing? What am I meant to do with myself? Well, if nothing else, I want to encourage every single one of us in here that we are all called to love God and to love people. But I do believe more than that God gives us all a specific and a unique purpose in our lives, something that only we can fulfill, that God has only given to us as individuals. I love here at Icon Church that our vision for church is human flourishing. And that simply means that we want every person to be able to live their best lives. We want to see everyone flourish in whatever area of life they find themselves in. I believe that God has handpicked and molded and shaped and equipped you to live your best life. That the dreams, that the desires, that the gifts and the talents that He's put inside of you have all been handpicked, they've all been molded, and they've all been shaped so that you can fulfill those dreams. More often than not, when we ask ourselves this question, what are we meant to do? What is our purpose? It usually is something that we do enjoy doing, which is a good thing. We are usually called, we are usually designed to do something that we are naturally good at, that we are gifted at doing, that we enjoy doing. It can start off as a dream or an idea of who you want to be or what you want to become. Now, I don't think that age kind of comes into this. I don't think it matters how old you are. We always find ourselves asking this question, no matter what stage of life we are in. But even though we're good at something, even though we may be naturally gifted at it, it's not always easy. Or at least it doesn't always start easy. I've got a few examples of some people that hopefully most of you will know. The first one is Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein, while he was in school, his teachers called him slow and mentally handicapped. He also didn't speak until he turned 4, and he didn't read until he was 7 years old. But now, he is arguably one of the most famous scientists, and he has transformed the world's understanding and reality of physics and how things happen. And then he later went on to win the Nobel Prize in Physics. The second person, who I had never ever heard of, but some people have heard of him, which is good, is Colonel Hardland David Sanders. Who has heard of him? Okay, it is really just me. But this guy, and I am so grateful for him, this is the guy who created the recipe for KFC chicken. Beautiful. However, his recipe was first rejected 1,008 times before a restaurant decided to take it in and use it. And on top of that, he didn't just send this recipe to restaurants. He actually went to all 1,009 of those restaurants, driving himself around in his own van and sleeping in it when he needed. KFC is now incredible, and it is one of a well-known worldwide fast food restaurant. Steven Spielberg, he had a dream of making movies. And he, in order to fulfill this dream, he applied to film school, but was rejected by the University of Southern California twice. He then applied to the California State University, and my husband Ben, he loves his films, and he kind of gave me a little bit more information about this. But when he was studying at California State University, he began an unpaid internship at Universal Studios. And this is what Ben told me. He said, do you know how he ended up in that internship? I'm like, no. So he said, apparently, he went on a tour bus, like you do, around Universal Studios. But at the end of it, he got off the bus, he hid in the bathroom, waited for everyone to leave, and then just started walking around Universal Studios by himself. And he did that a few times to the point where people actually genuinely thought he was a staff member and he'd never been offered a job. So that is how his career started. He then, because everyone thought he was already on staff, ended up getting a job. And then obviously his career started from there. He was eventually awarded an honorary degree from the University of Southern California, the one who had previously rejected him, and has now become a trustee of that university. And he is known for creating films that I'm sure many of us love, such as Jurassic Park, Jaws, E.T., Indiana Jones, Saving Private Ryan, and many more. And has won 2 Oscars for Best Director. Stephen King. I've never read any of his books, but I'm sure some of you guys will. The first book that he wrote was called Carrie, and it was rejected 30 times by publishers. So he threw it in the bin. He got rid of it, he gave up. Until his wife came and picked it out and told him to try again. And now he is a well-known author who has had over 350 million copies of his books sold worldwide. You see, these people, they all had dreams. They all had some sort of desire within their heart. Whether they knew it was designed and put into their hearts by God or not, I believe that every person, whether we know or whether we don't know, has had a dream, a desire, a purpose put into our hearts by God. And in these moments of them trying to fulfill their journeys to achieve their dreams, they all had to overcome some of these failures. I'm sure in these moments, maybe Steven Spielberg, he could have given up after that first uni rejection, and we never would have seen the films that we get the privilege of seeing. Stephen King, if his wife, who's grateful that we have people in our lives that will encourage us when we feel as though we're not good enough. If it wasn't for his wife, we never would have read any of his books. Or you wouldn't, because I haven't read any. But you know, we all have moments in our lives where we feel as though we are a failure, where we feel as though we need to give up, or we should give up. But actually, we need to overcome those failure moments and actually allow ourselves to flourish in our lives. When it comes to finding our true purpose, I believe that we need to have faith. We need to have the faith to overcome these failures. We need to have the faith to actually run after our dreams and chase after them. Hebrews 11, verse 1 says, "Now faith is the confidence in what we hope for and the assurance about what we do not see." Faith is the confidence that God has called us. It's the confidence that he has put dreams, he has put those desires within us, and he has given us a purpose. And the assurance that our failures are not final. I know I am surely grateful that my failures are not final. One moment that I experienced in my life where I could have failed, I easily could have failed, was when I was in college. And we had assignments to do. Some of them, most of them were written. Some of them were practical. And one of the ones that we had to do was our preaching assessment, where we had to write, I think it was a 10-minute message and present it to a group of between 20 and 25 people. Now, we didn't all do it on one day. It got split. So like a couple of people did it each week. And I don't know what happened, but somehow I completely forgot what date I was meant to be speaking on. So on this specific date, I remember walking into our tutorial classroom, and on the whiteboard was a list of 3 names, and my name was one of them. And in that moment, panic hit. I did not know what to do. I had absolutely no idea that it was meant to be me speaking. I had submitted my notes. I had done that, but I couldn't remember what my actual message was about because it was a few weeks before that I'd written it. So I was panicking and I was freaking out. I had no idea what to do. So I tried my very best to get out of that situation. I begged and I begged with our tutorial leader. I said, I didn't know. Please give me next week. I'll do it next week. I did not want to do it. I was freaking out in that moment. So he didn't really give me much grace, although he gave me a little bit of grace. And he said, okay, you don't have to do the notes that you've given me. Just do whatever you want. Now, that freaked me out even more. Because in that moment, I was racking my brains. I was like, what on earth am I going to share for 10 minutes off the top of my head? I had no idea. So I ran. I ran to the library. And I sat in front of a computer, and one of my friends in college chased me down the corridor and sat with me and said, no, Hannah, you can do this. Let's breathe, stop crying, because I was a mess. Stop crying, get your head together, and you can do this. And I did, and I got up and I spoke for 10 minutes. But in that moment, I did have a choice to make. It was kind of forced because my tutorial leader wasn't going to let me run away from the situation. But I had a choice to make. I could either fight that fear of standing up and thinking of something off the top of my head and deliver a message to those people, or I could flee that situation, or I could run away. In the moment, my response was to flee, but I was forced, or I was encouraged to fight. I mentioned at the start, fight or flight. If you're a psychologist, you'll know this. But it's a psychological term that describes a human response to a stressful or dangerous situation. This was a very stressful situation for me. But it's when something goes off in our brains and it causes us to go into panic mode. It causes us to respond in an attacking way. How can I overcome this? Usually in the face of a stressful situation or a dangerous situation. Now, I did ask Natalie last week, who is a psychologist, what kind of goes off in your brain. And the thing that she did, and the thing that I remember, is she said, your brain, this part of your brain shuts down, and did this hand movement. So every time I've been thinking of this message, all I've been doing is, brain shuts down, activate brain. Brain shuts down, activate brain. So if ever you don't remember, your brain will shut down, but we need to activate our brains. But whatever goes off in our brains, it causes our bodies to react. And there's a few effects, there's a few things that our body kind of does in response to this situation. One of them being where adrenaline is released throughout the bloodstream. So stories that you hear where people have jumped in front of a car to save their child or something, that's acting on impulse, that's acting from adrenaline in this fight or flight response. It can also cause our respiratory rate to increase. So our breathing starts to panic. I don't know, you may be able to picture yourself in these moments where you're struggling to get your breath in, you're getting all nervous and panicky. Our pupils dilate. Our eyesight sharpens. We want to fix our eyes on the things that could cause danger to us. Our awareness intensifies. We become aware of the things that are surrounding us, of our environment. Our impulses quicken, and our perception of pain diminishes. And our body becomes prepared for fight or flight. By its very nature, the fight or flight system, or the response, bypasses our rational mind, so anything that we would consciously think of doing, and it moves us into attack mode. It moves us into what our first natural human response would be. We may overreact. We may have our fear exaggerated. Our thinking can get distorted. We can narrow our focus to the things that can harm us. And fear can become the lens through which we see the world. I was thinking about this, and I think one of my deepest fears comes down to a fight or flight moment. Now, if I say to you, or if I asked you what your biggest fear was, I can guarantee some would say spiders, some would say heights, some would say snakes, whatever it would be. My biggest fear, and this really is my biggest fear, is mice or rats. Rats, some people kind of can understand, but I always get laughed at whenever I say I'm scared of mice. Now, the reason that I'm scared of mice is because when I was younger, when we kind of got to, I think it was the age of 8, in order to kind of prepare us and give us a little bit more responsibility, my mum and dad said, when you get to the age of 8, you can choose if you want to have a pet or not, because you'll be able to look after it, in theory. And so I really wanted 2 guinea pigs. Well, I just wanted a guinea pig, but then apparently it's better for them to have a friend. So I got 2 guinea pigs. And there was one afternoon where me and my mum were out in the garden cleaning their cage out, getting rid of all of the dirty hay or whatever. And while my mum was doing that, she asked me to go to the shed and to get to the place where we kept their food, their guinea pig food, and fill up their food bowls. Now, I think I'd had them about a year, so I was probably about 9-ish. And I can remember I went to the shed, I got the bag of food, I was stood on the grass, I put the bowl down by my feet, bent down, and as I poured the food into the bowl, a dead mouse fell right in front of my feet. And in that moment, I remember it so clearly to this day, I screamed and ran right upstairs into my bedroom and would not come out. And even to this day, I am petrified of mice. Can't deal with it. But that was a moment for me where I had to, well, my human response was to flee, was the flight response. I didn't want to fight and get rid of this mouse. I just ran away. But this morning I want to look at a story in the Bible of a guy who, I don't know if he had this response, but he chose to flee a situation. And that's the story of Jonah. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to read the whole story because it's 4 chapters long, which, if you read in your own time, is manageable, but I won't read it and bore you all for now. So I'm just going to quickly summarize it all, but I do want to start by just reading Jonah 1, verses 1 to 3. It says, "The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me." But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. When he went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. See, Jonah was a prophet. He was called by God, and he was given this message from God to take to Nineveh, to the Ninevites, to warn them of God's judgment, to warn them that they weren't quite living their best life. Now, Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, and Assyria was a huge threat to Israel. The kings didn't get on. And so Jonah found himself in Israel, and he did not like the Ninevites. He had a personal hatred. He knew that they were a threat to his country. He knew that they were a threat to his comfort zone. But God had called him to go and give this message to these Ninevites. And even though Jonah knew that this message was one of judgment, he also knew God's character. He knew that God was a merciful God, that he was slow to anger, and that he is a kind God. And he knew that if a prophet such as himself went to Nineveh and proclaimed this message, and they took it well, that God would spare them, that he would restore the city, and he wouldn't destroy them. And Jonah didn't want that. He didn't want that because, like I say, they were a threat. He didn't like them. He was concerned, and he was more focused about how this would affect him. See, I think that in this moment, whether consciously or unconsciously, Jonah chose the earthly good over the heavenly reward. He chose the things that would benefit the things of earth there and then, whereas actually God wanted this big heavenly reward where he loved all his people, and everyone got to receive the love, the kindness, and the grace that he had. Even though Jonah ran away, God did have mercy on him. His failure wasn't final. So we pick it up in chapter 17 of verse 1. And it says, now the Lord provided. So before this, Jonah had run away. He was on a ship. They got caught up in a storm. And the people on the boat were like, why is this happening? What are we meant to do? They were panicking. And Jonah kind of openly confessed, and he said, I think this is happening because I've disobeyed God, because I'm running away. I'm not doing what he's asking me to do. So they decided, they cast lots, and Jonah then agreed he would jump overboard and he would save the people on the boat. However, this is where God intervenes and he gives Jonah a second chance. So it says, now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. He said, in my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. Jonah came to a point of realization where actually what God was calling him to do was far greater than his own desires. That what the message that God had given him was to bring a heavenly impact down on earth. God rescued Jonah. He spoke to him a second time. And this time, Jonah did go and share the message that God had given him. And Nineveh received the message well, which you can read in chapter 3, verse 10. It says, when God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. Jonah still wasn't happy about this. God, true to his nature, had saved Nineveh, had been gracious towards them. But Jonah still wasn't happy because of the earthly consequences, because it still meant that this country that they saw as a threat could still be a threat to his comfort. And Jonah became angry. Now, this is the part of the story in Jonah where I don't fully understand, because he stays angry. And he never puts a smile back on his face, if he ever had a smile on his face in the first place. But that's the point where Jonah decided to flee, and then he decided to give up. He didn't want to continue with what God had called him to do. Because of his selfish desires and the fear of fulfilling his calling, the fear of what could happen if Nineveh became this powerful, God-worshipping country. He didn't want the fear of fulfilling his calling to share that message. Because of his selfish desires of not wanting to fulfill that and share the message, I think a whole host of people missed out on knowing the grace of God and his loving kindness from an earlier stage. But thankfully, God has a greater heart than we do. Thankfully, he didn't give up on the people of Nineveh, and he didn't give up on Jonah. He knew that Jonah's failure was not final. And I believe that from this, we can learn that the message that God has given us is for all people, whether we like them or whether not. The message that God has got of his love and of his grace and his restoration is for all people, and that we are responsible, that we are called, that we are purposed to share that message. In Matthew 28, verses 18 to 20, it's Jesus giving his final words before he ascended back into heaven and giving us the Great Commission. It says, then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. When God calls us to do something, he doesn't leave us to do it alone, but he promises that he will and he is with us to the very end of the age. So what is the point of this message this morning? Obviously, it's not a message of judgment. It's not a message of destruction. Well, I hope not. But the point that I want to share today is that we need to activate our faith to pursue our calling. That in those moments in life when we find ourselves in a fight or flight situation and our brain shuts down, that we need to activate our faith. We need to restore the things that God has called us, the things that he has asked us, the things that he has commissioned and put in our hearts to do. We need to believe that our faith can overcome our fears. When all else looks to be shutting down, instead of fleeing the situation, we need to activate our faith and fight to fulfill our calling so that we can play a part in bringing heaven down to earth. We all, like I mentioned at the start, we all have a purpose. We all have a reason. We all have a unique mission as well as the collective mission of the church. But like Jonah, we have a choice to make. We have a choice to go and share the message that God has given us, or we can run away. We have the responsibility to fulfill our call and bring our unique piece of heaven, our unique dreams, our unique gifts and talents, our unique piece of heaven down to earth. So I just want to quickly share 3 things that can help us when it comes to activating our faith in the face of fear. And these are all taken from what our body, our natural human response does in those fight or flight moments. So the first thing is we need to widen our vision. In fight or flight situations, one of the things that our body naturally does, like I said, is our pupils dilate. I had to look up what this meant so I got it right. I kind of knew. But when our pupils will widen in conditions of low light to allow more light to reach the retina. Jonah had a narrow vision. He was only looking for the best for the Israelites. He was only thinking of the best for himself, which is why he didn't want to go to Nineveh. But we need to widen our vision when it comes to our purpose, when it comes to our calling. It's not just about us, but we need to allow more light. We need to allow more of God. We need to allow more of Jesus into our lives and into our hearts so that we can overcome any fear with faith and fulfill our calling. John 8, verse 12. Says, when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. We need to open our eyes to all of this light, to all of the goodness that God can do in us and through us. We need to widen our vision and think of the church globally. We need to think of what more God can do in our lives. I loved the encouragement that Jane brought. That in our limitation, God isn't limited, but he can do more. He can do abundantly more than what we can see, what we can even dream or imagine. However, the vision is huge, but it needs every single one of us. Ephesians 2, 19 to 22 in the Message version says, that's plain enough, isn't it? You're no longer wandering exiles. You have a purpose. You have somewhere to go. This kingdom of faith is now your home country. You're no longer strangers or outsiders. You belong here with as much right to the name Christian as anyone. God is building a home. He's using us all, irrespective of how we got here, in what he is building. He used the apostles and prophets for the foundation. Now he is using you, fitting you in brick by brick, stone by stone, with Christ Jesus as the cornerstone that holds all the parts together. We see it taking shape day after day, a holy temple built by God, all of us built into it, a temple in which God is quite at home. A wider vision, a vision of the church becoming a home, of us being the house of God. And we are needed. We are included. Those dreams, those unique desires that God has put in our hearts, we need them. God needs them in order to bring his wider vision, his bigger purpose here on earth. We need to turn the I into we. We need to say, I am a part of this, but we are in this together. We are building God's house. We are building his kingdom. We need to look at the picture of what God intends to do and not just what our intentions are. And when it comes to activating our faith in the face of fear, how does widening our vision help this? Well, when we think of the bigger picture, when we think of a greater purpose, yes, I'm important, yes, I am needed, but I'm not in it alone. When we think of the bigger vision, when we widen the things that we're looking at, we think of what God is wanting to do, the grandeur of what he is wanting to do, that we are not alone, we've got one another, and ultimately God is with us. The second thing of how we can activate our faith is to narrow our focus. The human response in a fight or flight moment is our eyesight sharpens. To me, this says when we're in a situation, for example, if this has never happened to me, but if you've ever had a burglar come into your house, then you want to kind of fix your eyes on every movement that they are doing so that you know what is going on. You don't want them to steal, I don't know what, your favorite, I don't know, can't think of anything, favorite TV, I don't know. But you want to narrow your focus. You want to see exactly, you want to fix your eyes on that thing. We need to sharpen our focus on God. In our life situation, we can become so overwhelmed, we can become panicked, we can become stressed out with the things that we may have been challenged or tasked to do. But actually we need to sharpen our focus, fix our eyes on the things God has called us to do, the things God has intended for us to do. In 2 Corinthians 4, verse 18, it says, "So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." We need to fix our eyes on the things that God has called us to. Take our eyes off of us and turn them towards God. We need to allow our faith to direct where we're going. And then lastly, the third thing. We need to hasten our actions. Got a cheer from Gil. We need to hasten our actions. And the human response in the fight or flight moment is that our impulses quicken. See, Jonah waited until the second time of God calling him. He waited until he'd been given a second chance before he acted on what God was asking him. But I believe that when we hear God's voice, we need to act on it. Let's not wait. Let's not be people who wait until the time is right or until we are ready. Because the truth is, if we think like that, we're never going to be ready. But if we believe that God has already equipped us, that he has called us for such a time as this, then we will be quick to respond. That if someone in our life, someone in our worlds needs that encouraging word, that we are quick to encourage, that we are quick to be generous, that we are quick to act, that we are not waiting around. Even if a door is closing in front of us, as soon as it opens, we're not hesitant, but we are quick to move into the things that God wants us to move into. 2 Peter 1, verse 3 says, "His divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness." His divine power has given us everything we need. What he did for us by sending Jesus to die on a cross has given us everything we need. He has given us every victory that we will ever need in our lives. He has given us every bit of confidence. He has given us every bit of courage, every bit of boldness that we will ever need to overcome our fears with faith. We are equipped. We are able to fulfill the things that God has called us to fulfill. And we're not alone in doing it. We've got one another. We are part of the church. We are part of a wider vision. We are part of a bigger picture. We are not alone, but we are needed. We need to focus on what God says, not what people around us are saying, not what doctors are saying to us, but we need to focus on what God is saying and fix our eyes on him. We need to hasten our actions. Let's not be lazy. Let's not be laid back with our approach to fulfilling the things that God has called us to, but let's run. Let's run into everything he's got. Let's not flee the situation, but let's fight whatever we need to fight for. Let's fight for our family members to come to know Christ. Let's fight for our colleagues at work to come to know Christ. Let's fight for that job that we've been fighting for. Let's fight for the things in our lives, the things that God has put dreams in our hearts for. And when we do, we bring our piece of heaven down to earth. We build the bigger picture. We bring what God has intended. We allow God's vision to be fulfilled. And that is one of the greatest privileges that we could ever be a part of. So this morning, I want to finish by encouraging you that if you ever find yourself in a fight or flight situation, when your brain shuts down, to activate your faith, to activate the things that you want to fight for, to activate the things that God is calling you to do in your life, and to not flee the situation because of fear, but to realize that you are called, that we are equipped, that you are not alone, and that God has positioned and purposed every one of us for his cause. So I'd love you all to stand. And we're going to worship God. And we're going to lift his name higher. And maybe this morning, you feel as though you're in a fight or flight situation where your brain has shut down, where you may feel like you've got no faith to fight anymore. But as we glorify his name, as we lift his name higher, let's allow our faith to be activated. Let's allow our dreams to surface once more and to step in to everything that God has got for us. Amen.
I won't let the storm with them